Today I'm going to be doing a game review of Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin. So I've just finished my first playthrough of the game and currently have about 100 hours into it. So if you've played the Dark Souls series, you probably have strong opinions about this one, because it seems like this game is good at getting strong opinions. I'll be comparing it to Dark Souls Remastered because that's the only other Souls game that I have ever played. Some things were better, and some things are worse, and some things feel just weird. The soundtrack is solid, but nothing really stood out to me. The music during boss fights is dramatic and fitting, but I can't say that I'm going to be humming any of these tracks after putting down the game. The sound effects are really well done. The metallic clang of the weapons, the crunch of a heavy strike, and the eerie ambiance of certain areas added a lot to the experience. The environmental sounds, like the distant groans, the whispering wind, or sometimes just the unsettling silence in some zones, did a good job of keeping the tension high. In general, I feel like they got the sound balance right in this game. There were a lot of times when I was playing Dark Souls Remastered that I felt that the world was too quiet, and I never felt that way with this game. I'm not sure what the difference was, and it may simply be that I was expecting a less musically driven game this time around. Let's be real. Dark Souls games aren't exactly known for spoon-feeding you their story. You have to dig for it, piece things together, and even then, you're left with more questions than answers. And the second game follows this tradition. Because of that, I don't feel that I have really gotten any sense of this game's story with just this single playthrough. That being said, I feel that the basic outline was confusing and blurred. This might be a level design issue, but the result is a lack of clarity within the story's purpose. The path to the final boss is more confusing than it needs to be. Finding the king's doors and knowing when to backtrack to them? Well, good luck remembering where those were after hours of playtime. Assuming that you even recall that they exist and can now associate those doors to this ring that you've now collected. The path forward was so vague that I had to look it up. Even though I was equally out of touch with the story in Dark Souls Remastered on my first playthrough, I never got this completely lost. The path forward was always pretty clear. It might not have been the best option, and I might have taken some optional side trips along the way, but there was always a clear path forward. When I got the Lord Vessel, I knew where I was supposed to take it. Mixed feelings about the world design in Dark Souls 2. On one hand, the environments themselves look great and feel immersive. There's more interaction with the world. There's a ballista that you can use against enemies and torches that you can light, which is a step up from Dark Souls, where the environment mostly just existed to punish you. The environments feel detailed, and nothing looks half-finished or rushed like some areas in Dark Souls 1. On the other hand, the level connections are weird. Some areas transition in ways that make zero sense, like how you take an elevator up and suddenly end up in the Iron Keep, a lava-covered fortress that should, logically, be underground. Compared to Dark Souls 1, where the world felt interconnected and believable, this one feels more like a collection of levels that were just slapped together haphazardly. The NPCs are a mess. There's some really interesting ones like Aldia, who gives the game a unique philosophical lens to view the game with. And there's Lukatibu, however you say this character's name.
I'm called Lucatil.
That has an actual character arc that makes her story interesting and worth following, and I'm looking forward to exploring it more. But then there are a lot of forgettable characters that just exist to be vendors or quest givers without much personality. In Dark Souls 1, the NPCs felt like they had more weight, more importance. And here in the second game, they just don't stick with you in the same way. I miss having that one NPC that carried the weight of the game. There was no equivalent to Solaire, and the game experience was the worst for it. I think that the Emerald Herald could have been this character. She is present with you throughout the story and is a clear ally, yet I was never emotionally invested in her. And there are some things that the second game does really well, and other things that it does frustratingly wrong. So looking at the good, you can teleport between bonfires from the start, which makes traveling much more enjoyable. And then they added these life gems, which were a great addition. It gives you an additional way to heal yourself beyond the Estus flask. It was a nice change. Being able to respec your character was fantastic. The game doesn't really explain its mechanics well, so it's nice to be able to fix mistakes that you made in building your character. The inventory management was way better. You can actually use your souls while keeping inventory open, and I know it is a small thing, but it was a needed change, and I don't know how much it drove me nuts in the first game that I had to close in and out every time. So this was huge. I loved it. It just felt like sorting items was easier and more intuitive. I like that you could wear 4 rings instead of 2. More customization is always welcome to me. Being able to run while locked on to an enemy feels really good and makes just the combat flow and maneuverability just feel better and more natural. But there were also things that they didn't do so well. Dodging feels terrible early on. You start off feeling like you're rolling through molasses, and unless you understand that agility increases iframes, which it never explained in game, dodging feels inconsistent and frustrating. Enemies follow you forever. Running away isn't really an option anymore, which makes fights more intense, but also removes a key strategy that I used in Dark Souls 1. But then there was this weirdness with limiting enemy respawns. Like, once you kill an enemy enough times, it stops respawning. Why? Running through completely empty areas just feels weird. I don't understand this. I hated this mechanic. It was my least favorite thing about this game. The lock-on system. It was unreliable. Even when you're locked onto an enemy, your attacks don't always go where they should. It makes fights much more frustrating than they needed to be. And don't get me started on the max health reduction after death. One of the best parts of Dark Souls 1 was the freedom to experiment. Jump off a cliff just to see what happens, or see if you can get to that other platform. You could just fight a tough enemy just for the fun of it, see if you could. And in Dark Souls 2, dying lowers your max health, which actively discourages this risk-taking, and it's just not as fun. Overall, I had a good time playing this game. I actually enjoyed my first playthrough this game more than I did my first playthrough Dark Souls 1. Having an idea what I was getting into went a long way towards that, I'm sure. In general, I'm still more a fan of the first game than I am of the second. And this is largely because of the world design and the NPC integration. So how about you guys? What do you think are the important elements to a great game? And which did you enjoy more, the first or the second game?